All right, my friend. Sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties. Our phone froze, and I don't know. It was just weird. So we're here.
Hey, guys.
We are back after a week off. I've been sick all week, so I sound like poop right now. But we are back, and today we're going to talk about hypothyroidism and dairy. Before we get started, I apologize now for any disgusting noises that I might make, whether it be a cough or a sniffle, because I was pretty sick yesterday. So, moving forward, let's get into some of the, I always forget the word for that. Logistics.
Some
Let's
details.
details.
We're just gonna run over some quick things to make sure you guys have what you need.
Right. So the first thing is, as you know, because we say it every single time, number one, of course, we are here every single Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific Coast time. We've kind of locked in that time. We were at 12 o'clock, but we decided to change it for personal reasons. It kind of just works out better for us. Hopefully it works out for other people. If not, you can always watch it on the playback. We save it on our Facebook page. If you go to the left-hand side, click on videos. It's in videos. And we upload it on YouTube. So you can find it in 3 places if you need to find it. Secondly, and I'll put the link to this below once my computer comes around here. Everything seems to be a little off right now. We offer a complimentary 15-minute consult. This is for anyone, no matter where you are, where you live. Even if you live in Europe with all these new regulations happening with the internet, you can still get a free 15-minute consult. And I'm going to put that link in the comment section. And it's a chance for us to build a relationship with you, understand, or I should say build a relationship, but also help us answer some of your questions regarding what's going on, what you've been struggling with, and bring some clarification to some of those things, as well as, of course, talk about, our approach and how we would work with someone like you.
Yeah, just new and refreshing possibilities, because I think, again, there's this continuous process of chasing symptoms, so on and so forth. So we're just presenting something new, and that's just an opportunity for you to get to learn a little bit more about how that might work for you in what you're dealing with.
I think the biggest thing is when people fill out that form, it's really simple. Some people write pages, some people write one thing. The biggest thing we hear, whether someone works with us or not, we still talk to them, is that people are so confused, right? Because of the web. This person says this person says that. Someone says dairy is the devil, other people say don't, right? So it's like we're trying to really personalize it, make people understand things from that point of view, versus just the generalized point of view. So when we talk to people, I think that's the most common complaint. So you want to end that cycle and give people some direction. Secondly, we have our Restoration Thyroid audio series. It's a 7-part audio series on how to heal your adrenals and thyroid with food. It's wonderful. We get great feedback on it. It's free. It's complimentary. You can download that by clicking the link in the comment section and subscribing now. Realize that because of some of the news laws coming out in Europe, that if you do subscribe, that you can unsubscribe anytime, as well as you will receiving beside your complimentary audio series our weekly emails about our vlog, specials, etc. So you can always unsubscribe after you get your audio series. I think that's about it.
I think you hit them all.
Yeah.
I think you hit them all. I think we're ready to proceed on to dairy.
So why are we talking about dairy?
Oh, because, again, the confusion. I think there's as much confusion wrapped up around dairy as there is sugar and fat and everything else. That, again, because there's just confusion. So we want to talk about it. And what we see as we work with people. I think that's the biggest difference with some of the information that we talk to you guys about, is that we have been working with people for a very, very long time in this industry, and we've been applying the approach that we practice today for the last decade, if not more, with the people that we're working with. So there's been a lot that we've been able to see just clinically in our practice, and that's really where we're coming from when we talk about these things. But bottom line is there's a lot of confusion around dairy. Should I, shouldn't I? What kind should I, what kind shouldn't I? And we're going to try to answer some of those questions today.
What's up, Melissa? What's up, Greg?
Hey, guys.
Mr. Taper, you sexy beast, you.
And I also want to say that when we talk about things, it's always coming from the perspective of low thyroid function, hypothyroidism. So what effects is that having on the body, and what do we need to think about when we are choosing the foods that we're choosing? What state is the body in, and what are some of the properties within those foods? And we've talked about that a lot before. So specifically when we speak to dairy.
Right, and I think, we were talking about this right before this. We were sitting in our jacuzzi drinking our orange juice and gelatin. I'm just kidding for you people out there that probably believe everything I say. Is that there is a lot of... I should have gone with it. It sounded pretty good.
It's not unlikely.
It's not unlikely. We don't have a jacuzzi, though. Maybe I'll just sit outside. Is that there is confusion, right? Whether it's good or bad. But there's so many underlying things about dairy that we're not looking at, right? When the research is done, or the articles are written, or the blog is written, what type of dairy are we talking about, right? Are we talking about cheese? Are we talking about raw cheese? Are we talking about cheese with enzymes in it? Are we talking about yogurts? Are we talking about Greek yogurts that are strained? Are we talking about A1 milk, A2 milk? Are we talking about raw milk? Are we talking about homogenized milk? Are we talking about pasteurized milk, right? Are we talking about like baseline crappy conventional milk, right? So there's so many different, we can't just say dairy is bad. Nowadays, it's too big. It's too big of a topic, right? And it's not just about homogenous. I remember years and years and years ago when I started this, like when I first got introduced to this stuff through Paul Chek and the Chek Institute, like back in 2003 or 4. I'd drive to work listening to his audio series. And it was just about homogenization and pasteurization. Now it's grown, right? So I think what we want to say is this: forget about all that.
Do you think it's grown because everyone's trying to find what's wrong with milk based on how they're experiencing it? Or do you think it's grown... Wait, I had a question in my head and now I can't think about it. But I'm just curious because, again, are we trying to look for what's wrong with milk instead of looking at what's wrong with us? And I think that's the bigger question.
Yeah, well, I've always said this.
I don't know. It was just something that popped in my mind.
It did pop. I saw it. We've always said that you're not intolerant to dairy. Dairy is intolerant. No. Yeah. Dairy is intolerant to you, right? So it's the state of your system. Now, of course, there's a lot of other things that we just talked about, right?
Exactly.
Is it organic? Is it raw? Is it homogenized? Is it goat? Is it sheep? Is it bison? Is it camel?
How much are you doing? When are you doing it?
I mean, there's so many variables, right? And I know some people say, well, if it's not your mom's milk, you shouldn't drink it. And that's okay. Those people can go sit in the corner and eat their miso soup and just be happy wearing hemp pants. That's fine.
No, but I also think that is the fear. That's the closed-mindedness. That's part of what's feeding that confusion, is just that
100%.
This is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. And again, it's what body is it going into, and where is it coming from? That
creates the limiting beliefs, right. And that's how we see everything. We see everything through these lenses, so we live in fear of food, right? Like I was saying to a client today, she's like,
sorry
well, my
about
blood...
the noise in the background. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry about the noise. Our landscapers are doing our lawn.
In the rain.
In the rain.
Super genius.
Yep, super genius. She was like, well, my blood sugar's high because she's taking her blood sugar, so I don't recommend that. So just FYI. It's because of the carbs. I'm like, you don't even eat a lot of carbs. What if your blood sugar's high because you're not eating enough carbs? So we sometimes have to change our mindset instead of just continually banging our head off the wall. We're like, dairy's bad. Yeah, dairy's bad. It doesn't work. Sugar's bad. The funny thing is, a lot of us don't use dairy and we don't use sugar, but we're still bad. So we have to really look at us, who we are, where we're coming from, whether we've had traumas, emotional traumas, physical traumas. Like we said, it's the state of our physiology. So we have to look at who we are and how we can handle it. So let's go through kind of, based on our research, why we find people to be more tolerant to dairy these days or intolerant to dairy. And some of the things you can do to start introducing it if you want to. Now, we understand most people are afraid of it and they don't want to. So if you don't want to and you don't like it and you find it's inflammatory and it's bad for you, bottom line is
don't do it.
Don't do it.
It's
right?
not going to make or break your healing process. So although we're talking about dairy, again, this is going to help unravel the fact that just because it's good or we like it and when we find it very healthy, doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. So.
Right. I mean, it's. I didn't grow up drinking dairy. Okay, I grew up eating some dairy, but I didn't grow up in a household where we ate a lot of dairy. So it's very hard for me to drink milk. I mean, I can drink it. It's not hard to drink it. I can drink it, but not to be literal or anything. But I do much better on like cheeses or yogurts and things like that. So we have to look at that when we talk about the person. There's just so many things to look at. So we have to look at the person instead of the dairy. But we also have to look at the dairy in some instances because, of course...
Well, it always comes down to quality with anything, and especially any of your proteins. It always comes down to quality. So that will certainly be talked. I don't know if we'll be talking about it in that much more depth moving forward, but it's always quality first.
So what happens is, because of being in a hypometabolic state, when we say hypometabolic, what we're talking about is we're not regulating our blood sugar, we're not storing energy, we're not using that energy to convert thyroid hormone, we're not using that thyroid hormone and that stored energy, which is glucose, to be used in the cell to produce energy, to keep that feedback loop going, to keep us in that healing state, right? So that's hypometabolic. The problem with that is you stimulate the stress reaction. What happens from there? It's endless. You could do the research, right? We've talked about it
a million times.
6 billion times, right? But what happens with that is, of course, we're not producing a lot of thyroid hormone. Our body's in a stress state. Gastric juices, hydrochloric acid, pancreatic acid, all these things are actually decreased. It's been shown through research. We're not making things up. It happens. So our ability to break down food lessens. This is why people get food sensitivities. This is why people get intolerances. And this is why people get intolerant to milk. It's that simple. Hey, what's up, Kate? So if you think about it, once again, we just summarized it. It's the state of your body. It's not milk that's a problem. We are not living in a way to support energy production. And what happens is our body compensates because of that. Yes. And that compensation robs Peter to pay Paul. What happens is, in a nutshell, is we are now not, because of that slowing down of the GI system, because we're in a stress state, because those juices have been slowed down, we start inhibiting the production of lactase in the small intestine. Why is it there? To help us break down lactose and absorb calcium. So if we can't release lactase to break down lactose, what happens? You can't break down milk. You're intolerant. And if you look at some of the Instagram posts I posted last week or maybe this week about hydrochloric acid and hypothyroidism, we produce it by way less than 50% when we're stressed. This is why a lot of people that are hypothyroid develop these sensitivities, develop B12 deficiencies, develop iron deficiencies. They can't break down their food and they think they need these supplements. But that's not the problem. It's being in the hypometabolic state that's the issue.
I was just going to say that underlying it all, and again, it's kind of, you guys, it's a little redundant because underlying it all is this metabolic issue that's happening, but there is a level of malnourishment as well, and I don't know why I felt the need to share that with something that you had said. But anyway, going back to dairy, and I think you have the stress state, you have the effects of digestion, you have the malabsorption issues, you have the malnourishment issues. It's all a vicious cycle. But we've also, again, and that's why we look so clearly or much more closely at the person, number one, and at the properties within the food. So somebody's in a stress state. Do we recommend them dairy when they first start working with us? Absolutely.
Most of the time, no.
Absolutely.
And I know there's a lot of people out there that push it, but we always look at the person. Mm-hmm. We're not saying dairy is bad.
No.
We're saying the person can't break it down. So we're not going to give that person dairy right now. And we're going to make sure, sorry, my phone's about to die.
Until they're able to tolerate, until we're able to create a little bit more stability in the system to where now we can begin introducing certain forms of dairy, which we'll talk about.
I'll say not everyone, but I'd say like 75-80% of the time. Agree?
What?
that you start to you don't recommend it?
Oh yeah, most of the time. If they've been
especially
doing
with gut issues,
and they feel okay on the small amounts, then
Yeah.
we might stay there until we create a little bit more regulation,
Right.
and so we can identify whether or not that dairy is actually contributing to some of the issues. At that point, there's just that baseline's not clear enough. But typically, if somebody is in a very low metabolic state because of what we understand is happening digestively in the system, it makes more sense to leave it out right now.
But Kate brought up a good point. What do most people do? And this is how, as Americans, we want to fix things, right? So we can't break down dairy. Now, when I was in college, I remember I called my mother one day, and I lived in my fraternity house. Yes, I was in a fraternity. And
nobody's surprised.
No one's surprised. Why? It was like the best time of my life.
Go ahead.
Hey. Call her. I'm like, I think I'm dying. Like, I can't stop going to the bathroom. Like, I was just constant. And come to find out, I was lactose intolerant, of course. And the trigger was my breakfast, lunch, and dinner that I was eating every day, which was Keystone Light. You know, so that was causing a lot of that, of course, and then the cereal on top of it, and, you know.
The package of donuts.
That I was eating. Yeah, this is college. That's what I did. I did it. Got a problem with it.
We all did it.
We did it.
Anyway, moving forward.
Yeah. So.
Back to what Kate has shared with us.
Yeah, so the problem is, what do? We go, okay, give me the lactose-free milk. Give me the lactose pills. That's what I used to take. I used to chop those things like they were candy, right? So I could drink milk, but I still had the symptoms. But it created the illusion like I was under control because the symptoms weren't as bad, right? I mean, I could go and the whole room would clear out, right? It was that bad. Or we start drinking nut milks. You know, there's just so many different things out there. We begin to have to look at those in themselves, what's in them. Are they highly, processed? What they do to our system? Because they're really not even matching what milk really is, right? We look at nut milks and things like that. It's really not a milk. It's more of a fat.
It's the constant dance around the symptom versus addressing the issue, right? And I think that goes back to my question earlier, is we're constantly trying to look for what's wrong with everything else versus turning the attention towards ourselves and seeing how we can work with that. And create that stability.
Yeah, I mean, it's going back to like what like something I learned from Paul Chek. It's probably the one thing I learned was it's not true, but it was what is your definition of health, and it's taking responsibility for yourself, right? So that's really what it's about. It's really saying, well, I am the issue. I can't break down milk. It's saying I need nut milk, right, which is a high amount of unsaturated fat, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't want to dance around the issue. We want to look at, okay, well, I can't break it down. Let me cut it out and try to heal, so maybe I can possibly add it back in. And if I can't, that's fine. At least I healed on top of it and put my body in a more metabolic state, right? So at the same time, when you start seeing all these intolerances, everyone's like, well, I'm intolerant to this, I'm intolerant to that, I've done the food test, so I'm just going to eliminate those foods and everything's going to be great. Doesn't work like that, right? You have to realize your system is compromised. That's why you're starting to become intolerant to food. That'd be like saying you're intolerant to air now. Now we have a serious problem, right? Because you have to thrive on air, right? We can go a couple weeks without eating, but we need food to survive. And when you start becoming intolerant to food, what does that tell us about your system? That acute stress that I talked about at the beginning is now chronic. It's deeper throughout all the systems, all your cells. And now you're becoming into an immune compromised state, which is like the last place you want to be, right? So we have to look at that and say, well, I am intolerant to dairy. How do I build myself back up? And we'll talk about that at the end.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's kind of where we can go. I mean, we've got some notes here, guys, and I'm looking at all of them, and I'm we're talking about the correlation between the small intestine, hypothyroidism. We're talking about the estrogen, cortisol, progesterone relationship. They're all intertwining. You've heard us talk about them a million times, and I don't want to not put emphasis in them. But I think that, it just comes back to the same thing. If you're in a chronic state of stress because of the pathways that feeds, or because the hierarchy in the body, the stress hierarchy, or you're always going to end up with a progesterone deficiency potentially because the body is asking for more cortisol to keep things regulated, to keep things moving.
Well, it's just going back to that stress response,
that's
right? So it's like now...
It's just, I'm looking at these notes, but I think as far as, let's cut the chase and let's get into some of the solutions because it's... it all plays in with one another. And maybe Josh wants to talk a little bit about the PTH and calcium absorption and things like that, which, again, I don't know. Do you want to touch on that? I don't know.
Okay. We're just going for it, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I guess for us, it is redundant, but I think sometimes when people understand the mechanism, they stop trying to chase it with supplements or nut milks. Right? Or whatever it may be.
The fear. Yeah.
Right, because they understand, hey, well, maybe I need to sit down and say it is me. Instead of projecting it onto other things and saying, I need this or I need that. Instead of, I need to actually change how I'm eating and change how I'm living to support myself so I can break down food, not be intolerant to food, etc. Because with that stress response, of course, we affect the ratio of estrogen and cortisol to progesterone, right? Well, it's been shown through a lot of research that progesterone helps to stimulate those enzymes in the small intestine that upregulate lactase. Now, that doesn't mean everyone go out and start taking progesterone.
I was just going to say that.
It's not about that.
And unfortunately, that's where it's come to as well. Oh, progesterone. Okay, well, I can go get some of that, and I'll start taking that, and then I can tolerate dairy. No, that's not the case, because a lot of times you can feed that pathway in a very negative way.
It's all about that it's almost like everything we say is indirect. It's that indirect effect of regulating the stress in our life, like regulating the food we eat, creating new habits, creating new rituals, all the things we talked about to relieve the stress on the system, to rebalance that ratio of estrogen to progesterone so the hormones could do what they're designed to do. Because now when we downregulate that stress response, which is that cortisol, we balance the ratio of estrogen and progesterone. Then not only do we upregulate energy production and thyroid hormone conversion, we upregulate how our digestive system is working. We upregulate the lactate enzymes in the small intestine to break down lactose, as well as eliminating other food tolerances over time. I can tell you this, that when most people come to us and they're intolerant to foods, not green beans, but let's say eggs, by the end of working with us, most people can add those foods back in. I've actually had people add them back in way even before that, and it's just an emotional switch of like,
letting go.
I don't really have too many issues around them, but the lab says I can't, so I don't eat them, right? So,
and then again, it's not going back to eating them every single day and multiple meals. It's everything. It's going back to moderation with all of it. I don't think that anybody should be drinking milk for a meal or using it as a snack. Sometimes as a snack, but again, it's very specific for the person and at their point of healing. It works differently in different phases of the healing process. But I think, like Josh says, neither one of us were able to do a lot of dairy in the past, and now we do it quite consistently. There's a lot of yogurt, cottage cheese, milk.
Yeah, I do yogurt every day. I don't do a ton of milk. I can't do a ton of milk. I just didn't grow up on it. My body adapted to kind of not drinking it, and I've tried every type of milk every which way, and it just doesn't work. I mean, I can do about 4 ounces a day, but I can do yogurts and cheeses fine. But... Yeah. And it's a total different path, but
I say that only because we've seen it for ourselves and we've seen it for our clients. So there is an opportunity to slowly begin to get these things back in the right time after taking those steps of everything we've just talked about and re-regulating the system, regulating blood sugar, regulating conversion, restoring digestion, all those facts.
So before we get into kind of solutions, I know a lot of people say, well, dairy, we don't need dairy, right? But when we look at physiology, and this is why we always go back to physiology, because physiology never lies. And you cannot argue physiology, right? So we know when we don't absorb calcium, when we're in a hypothyroid state, right? Or we don't eat a diet that has calcium, what happens? Our body compensates. It robs Peter to pay Paul to help compensate because we're not meeting our body needs. Just like with everything.
Loads of calcium in our body.
So our body releases parathyroid hormone in excess to leach it from our bones, our teeth, etc., right? And push it in our blood to regulate our calcium levels. The problem is parathyroid hormone in excess is just as inflammatory as TSH, right? So we know that a deficiency in calcium is inflammatory, and it can be very inflammatory to the system as well as energy production. And we know that when we absorb calcium, it reduces inflammation. Now, that doesn't mean like you just take calcium and like, oh, inflammation's gone. It doesn't work like that, right? We have to regulate the system so we can absorb it to help regulate the PTH and create balance within the system, right? And this is one of the factors that plays into osteoporosis. It's not just calcium. It's actually cortisol, demineralizing bone, being in this state, as well as high PTH. So, Greg Taper wanted to know, how come Peter is always getting robbed? Peter is always, that's a good question. That's something I would say. Robbing Peter to pay Paul.
What you got there, Ruben?
I don't have an answer for that. That's probably one thing I probably won't come up for an answer for. I'll think about it, though. But that is, I got to use that sometime. It's pretty good.
Googled it, you find an answer.
Google that, Mr. Taper. Let's see what we can find. I like that, though. It's pretty cool. Good thinking. Good thinking. All right. So let's go into some of the solutions, because I know a lot of people say, well, how do I use it if I want to use it? Or, like we said, the problem,
And if you can't use it, what are some other ways that you can receive
Yeah.
calcium in your diet?
So the first thing is, if you don't want to use it, don't use it. Okay? It's that simple. We work with people that are fixed on it. They don't want it. They can't use it. They just feel like it's never worked for them. They don't like it. That's okay. We don't push it.
Go with that.
Go with that.
Stick
Listen
with
to your
it.
body.
Emotionally, physically, it's just going to benefit you more.
So for the people that we know that probably will never go back on dairy or don't want to do dairy, we recommend eggshells. We did a YouTube on it. I'm going to put that link in the comment section. You can watch that. How to make eggshell calcium. That's absorbable to help regulate the system. But keep in mind, if you just do that and do nothing else, it's not going to work. You actually have to create more of a physiological base with your nutrition so you can absorb it, right? It's still calcium, right? So you have to get your body out of that stress state with how you're living. You have to get your body out of that stress state with blood sugar regulation so you can absorb the calcium. So it's something you probably do later on down the line. You know, if you're my client, I don't want to get an email from you saying, do you think I should take egg cell calcium? Because you probably were ready to email me, and you don't need to take it. If I thought you did, I would have mentioned it. It's that simple. So just keep that in mind. Food first, regulate the system, regulate your blood sugar, down-regulate the stress, then add the eggshells in. Don't add them in right away because you won't absorb them.
Mm-hmm. You kind of just said all of those right there.
Yeah, I think secondly we have, reduce inflammation internally and externally, and I think that just goes back to, look at your life. How can you create new habits, new rituals, a new healing environment to allow yourself to heal, right? So I was talking with a client that works at home, and she has trouble making her meals for the day. I'm like, you're 10 steps ahead of most people that go to work and that can't have their meals. So it's like, when you commit to get healthy and you want to reduce inflammation, you have to create the space. This is something GD talks about all the time. You have to create that space, that environment for healing, right? That's a huge way to help reduce inflammation in the system, right? Externally and internally.
Yeah. It's an overwhelming thought.
Because you literally have to change.
Yeah, but it's not about doing it overnight either. So it's really about going slow. I bet you asked me whether or not you should be taking calcium. I'm gathering. But we get to talk tomorrow, so we'll see.
Yeah. I think third, were you going to say something?
No, I just think that, when we say things, you have to change you and whatnot. Number one, it's completely without judgment. I want you all to hear that. Number two, it's not easy, and what we're asking you to do is not an easy thing, but taking some of the tools that we do provide and some of the things that you get to hear from us with it, whether it's via restoration thyroid, it's about observation and creating awareness. And as you begin to do that, just tuning in, okay, here's some of the things that they're suggesting. why can't I make that happen in my life? What is it that's interrupting that? Continue to observe that and say, okay, well, let me try this. You know what I mean? Take those little bite-sized pieces, because again, they go over a long way. And I think that's just all I wanted to say, because I know when we say things like that, it can be like, okay, well, I still don't really know where to go with that.
Yeah.
Identify one thing that really stands out to you, and start there. That's it. With reducing inflammation externally, which will translate internally.
Right. Next thing would be, the two things would be using digestible foods in a way to regulate your blood sugar. And this is huge, not only in regulating blood sugar, but increasing immunity, down-regulating the stress response, which is getting control of cortisol and adrenaline, taking the burden off the adrenals, up-regulating energy production, and the most important thing, beginning to strengthen the flexibility of the nervous system. That's where it all starts, right? So we're working very deep within the system. Mm-hmm. That has to be in place before you even start thinking about adding in dairy or eggshells. And for a lot of people, it's tangible, so they can start there even before changing their lifestyle. So we talk about that and more in the Restoration Thyroid audio series. The link is in the comment section. Yeah.
Obviously, the obvious things is avoiding things with carrageenan, any type of gum, guar gum, locust gum. Yeah, and then obviously RBGH, which is the growth hormone. Staying completely away from conventional dairies, but really know what you're getting when you research your dairies, whether you're doing local farms or whatever it is you're purchasing. Do a little bit of research on that and where it's coming from.
So when we say carrageenan, we actually wrote a blog on that, and it's found in not only some dairy like ice creams, but it's found in a lot of like nut milks or carton coconut milks or soy milks, the alternatives that people are using, which is really not milk. So I'm going to put that link in the comment section. You can read on it, but it's highly inflammatory. It's carcinogenic. It creates even a more suppressed system.
However, if we were to recommend an alternative to milk for a fat, it would be something more along the lines of a coconut milk.
Canned coconut milk.
It's just
for
looking
fat,
for
though.
something, again, that doesn't have all the additives.
Right. So there's three parts to milk, and that's like the fat, the whey, and the solids, right? So when you get coconut milk, you're just getting the one piece. You're getting the fat piece of it. So it's the closest alternative, but we're talking about in a can versus just drinking it. What?
Greg Taper.
Yeah, he's a doozy. He's a taper.
Wow.
So of course those are the basics. Now this is usually probably the most prominent thing that I tell clients. So make sure you write it down. Type it, etch a sketch it, whatever you need to do. Is go slow.
Take that.
Run with See you. Peace.
Yeah.
See you guys next Thursday. Love you guys.
Okay, so when you guys want to start to introduce it back in, here are some cheeses that you may look for. Ricotta, Parmesan, mascarpone.
Well, yeah, so the reason we say this is mascarpone and ricotta don't have cultures. Most of the cultures are from Monsanto, and they're beneficial. They're not beneficial, but those cheeses don't have cultures in them, which that is another issue with dairy. So it's like we have all these issues, right? So when you get ricotta or mascarpone, it doesn't have cultures. A lot of people can handle them because most of those cultures come from fungus, right? And then Parmesan Reggiano, because it's a hard-aged cheese. Mm-hmm. But don't start all three of them. Go slow. Usually tell people to take like a square. Let's say they say, well, I want to start with mascarpone. Great. Get the mascarpone. Have like less than a tablespoon a day. Start introducing it to the system. How did you feel? What happened? I feel great. Good. Let's try another one. Okay? Let's cut that out. Let's try the mascarpone now. Right? Except. Okay, let's try the ricotta. Or the Parmesan Reggiano, right? So we got to go slow. Most people start, I had like 17 ounces and it was like great meal with a glass of milk. Didn't work. Of course it didn't work. You went from 0 to 100 overnight. It's crazy.
And
the
we
crap.
get it, guys. We all want it yesterday. You're not alone in this. You know what I mean? But at the same time, please go slow. Do it
So
now,
start
every
with-
other day or
yeah.
something like that, so you can begin to identify how it's affecting you.
But not right away. Once you've created that nutritional foundation that we talked about in the Restoration Thyroid audio series, once you begin to see stabilization, not only your body temperature pulse, but how you feel, your sleep, your energy, etc. So once you regulate that, then you can say, feel good enough, I'm going to try a piece of this, a piece of that, etc., and work with those. Then over time, usually what we do is once people can handle that, we go to yogurts. That would be the second step. We always pick a Greek yogurt over regular yogurt because it's strained, right? It's strained of all that. What's the word I'm looking
Lactate. Is it lactate?
No, I forget the word right now. But anyway, it's strained. So of lactic acid. So that's a less of a burden on the liver because we're not going to use the sugar stored to convert it. So Greek yogurt is definitely better or easier for our system to handle. It's less of a stress. We still start with small amounts, right? When we introduce a tablespoon, little bit, how does it feel, etc. Did it work? Let's try a different one. And then from there, if a person wants to, down the road, we just start with dairy. We try different types. Let's put some in your mouth and swish it around and spit it out. How do you feel the next day? We start really slow. But I have to be honest with you, most people, when we start introducing dairy, go from the cheeses to the yogurt, so that's about it. That's when they end, right? Maybe it's because we're not working with them for the rest of their life, or maybe it's because that's as far as they want to go.
Well, and I think that's a good point, is that we don't know how long it's going to take somebody to be able to begin to reintroduce these things. So, again, just keep working on the factors that will take you closer to restoring digestive function and take it from there.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing to remember is when you have a dairy intolerance, it's a permeability issue. It's a permeability issue from being in a hypometabolic state, stress state, right? Whether you feel stressed or not, there is an underlying stress. That's why you're intolerant to it, because you're not producing the very things you need to break it down. So if you work from there, you build yourself up, 6 months down the line or whatever, you start adding it in slowly. Most people can add it back in if they go at a slow enough pace and they try one of those 3 that we recommended. You have anything else to add?
No, I think those are some really good tools to begin moving in that direction if it's something that you want, and then we gave some alternatives.
All right.
Yeah.
So we're going to open up for a few questions, then we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, I have a client.
I know. Any questions for today? We don't have any questions. That's okay.
If anybody comes up with questions, post them down below, and we'll be sure to get to them. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and we hope you got something out of it.
Yeah, we'll be back next Thursday, 2:30 p.m. Pacific Coast time. Remember, there's a lot of links in the comment section. Check them out. If you want to recommend any future topics or you have questions about this, go ahead and put them in the comments section. We do have one question: whey protein. That is a piece of what milk is. It is literally, in my opinion, the byproduct of the pasteurization process, so a lot of people can't handle it. I'm not a big fan of using whey with most people. That's why we use gelatin. And I think sometimes it's hard for people to wrap their head around, but gelatin is not only a protein powder, but it has a lot of healing properties. So that's what we use as our protein powder versus whey, right? Because a lot of it is just trash. Even if it's grass-fed, a lot of people that have dairy issues that are hypometabolic still have trouble breaking it down, which it could create more inflammation because there's such tiny particles within the system, right? So that's why we always recommend gelatin over a whey protein, because it's not only digestible, but it's non-inflammatory and healing to the mucous membranes of the gut. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. Definitely put your comments below. We will see you next week at 2:30 p.m. Pacific Coast time.
Great day, guys.
Peace.
Bye-bye.